we have a good idea of what the lineup's going to look like in week one. We have depth chart, so we'll see where the starters are. And interestingly enough, some incumbent players, at least in the opening game of the season, have beat out some high-name transfers or some big-name transfers for the starting job. And I'll tell you why I think that's good news for the program itself here on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, your team every day. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available wherever podcasts are found. So subscribe in the old-timey audio version if you want to do that as well on your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. You can find me on Twitter at SimcoxSteven. We continue to get closer to game day. We are just a couple days away from TCU taking the field against Stanford on Friday night, and we have a depth chart now. We're going to hear from Sonny Dykes on Tuesday and hopefully have some updates on some guys who are missing from this depth chart who I presume are injured. But we have an idea of who the starters are going to be come Friday night. And the big news from an injury standpoint, two guys who were left off this list who weren't listed at all on this chart, Paul Olawale, who was projected to be a starter at defensive end for this team this upcoming season. He's not there. So not sure exactly what his injury is going to be. Like I said, Sonny will speak to the media on Tuesday. I'm sure he'll be asked about it. It sounded like he was working on the exercise bike and trying to get himself right towards the end of fall camp, but maybe he just couldn't get fully 100% healthy or to a place where they felt comfortable putting him out there. And then Trent Battle at running back, which, Trent's been kind of a change of pace guy, someone they've used in the passing game occasionally through his career. Not a ton of production, but I was excited about potentially him being someone who could give Cam Cook and Trey Sanders a spell. You got some young players at running back, though, that could benefit from this, depending on how long Trey is absent, by getting some carries themselves or getting some opportunities in the passing game as well. So that'll be interesting to watch. I'll be happy when we finally get to a place. I think it's coming soon. Texas Tech actually announced that they're going to start doing injury reports every week. College coaches, because they can and because they have this luxury, they treat injuries like FBI secrets. And so they don't want to get news out there. And these are still young men. You got parents involved too. Like, there's multiple tentacles to this. But at the same time, this has become such a big business. And the gamesmanship aspect of it, I just don't really feel like it's that helpful anymore. Everyone kind of knows everything these days. So why not just come out and be forthright? So I hope we get an update from Sonny Dykes on some sort of timetable for those two players. But Paul Olawale being out for week one is a big deal. I mean, he was projected to be one of their top pass rushers, so other guys are going to have to step up. But let's run down the depth chart, and I'll point out some surprises because there were a few on here as well. At quarterback, no surprise there. Josh Hoover's your starter. Ken Seals is the number 2 guy, and then Haas Haney behind them at number 3. At running back, Cam Cook, Trey Sanders, Dominic Johnson, which if you missed this, he was a late transfer ad from Arkansas, spent some time with Kendall Briles and Jimmy Smith, new running backs coach for the Frogs. Had a decent little career there, dealt with some injuries, did run for over 500 yards one season, was effective in the red zone, and the word is Trey Sanders has cut some weight, so he's still got a good frame, but he's not necessarily your prototypical big short yardage back. So I think Dominic could slide into that role. He's also someone that maybe they could use in some, 2 running back sets if they wanted to. And he showed some promise through the year. So I think it was a good sort of low risk late addition to the roster, and he'll be there in the mix as well. And then the young freshmen, Nate Palmer and Jeremy Payne, listed behind those guys, and it's an or. So it looks like, if there's some more carries to be had, both those players could get some opportunities here and there throughout the season. At tight end, Drake Dabney, Chase Curtis, DJ Rogers, and Lafayette Caraway. Chase Curtis had a really good offseason coming back from injury. Drake Dabney, the Baylor transfer, excited to see what he can do this year. I think that's going to be a good combo over the middle of the field, replacing the production from Jared Wiley from the past few seasons. At one of the outside wide receiver spots, Savion Williams and then JoJo Earl or Blake Newell. listed there. Super excited about Savion. I talked about that in yesterday's episode. I think he has a chance to have a huge year. I saw Steven Johnson wrote a really good story in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram about Savion and his family and how he's just trying to really show out in his presumably what's going to be his last season of college football. Huge opportunity for him to be kind of the go-to guy in this offense as Josh Hoover. It felt like he really had a good chemistry and rhythm with Savion in the back half of the season last year. J.P. Richardson at one of those slot spots. And then actually J.P. Richardson or Jack Besh. So Jack Besh has had a good offseason, and he's a guy that they wanted to use a lot last year. Because of injuries, they didn't get him very involved. You know, I think the problem for Jack is he's a tweener. Like he's not necessarily fast enough to be your prototypical slot guy. I don't think he's quite big enough to play the more traditional tight end role. But I feel like they're going to try to move him around the formation a little bit, get him the ball in different spots. And the J.P. Richardson has been your most consistent receiver, or was your most consistent receiver last year. So the fact that Jack Besh is pushing him for that starting job, I think shows the type of talent and ability he has and what the coaching staff thinks of him and who he is as a player. Behind those guys, the two speedsters, Major Everhart and Jordan Bailey, who should also be involved in special teams this year. At that other outside wide receiver spot, here's your first real surprise, even though I did predict this in my kind of depth chart projection late last week. Dalen Wright is the starter, and then Eric McAllister is behind him. Behind those guys, you got Braylon James and Dozie Azukama. Dalen Wright was really good when he was in the lineup last year. And his whole career has kind of been characterized by availability. If he's available, he's been a really productive player, had a huge game against Ohio State a few years ago for Minnesota, you know, had moments in Minnesota where he looked like the best player on the field. I've told this story before, but I reached out to Kane Robb, who hosts Locked On Golden Gophers, when the news dropped that he was coming to TCU. And Kane was like, yeah, I mean, he's a dude that you just hear about all over the program, because when he's ready to go and when he's fully healthy, like he makes the type of plays that guys just kind of salivate over because he's such a specimen, but it's just about consistency. And so part of me is skeptical that in year 5 of his college career, he's going to find that. But I think they're going to rotate wide receivers a lot. So it's not like Eric McAllister's not going to play. I still feel like Eric McAllister is going to be a big part of the offense. But the fact that Dalen Wright was able to win that job, I mean, good for him. And I think it does show that the coaching staff believes in his ability and just in that physical nature that he brings to the table. And hopefully he's someone that can help stretch the field this year, because that was sorely missing from last year's offense. Okay, let's get to the starting offensive line. Bless Harris at left tackle, Ben Taylor Whitfield behind him. At left guard, Colton Deary or Remington Strickland. I think it's going to be Colton Deary, but Remington did get a lot of reps in the spring and the summer. James Brockermeyer at center or Colton Deary. I feel like it'll be James Brockermeyer. Carson Bruno at that right guard spot, and then Mike Nichols at right tackle. So I think your 5 guys to start the season are going to be Bless Harris, Colton Deary, James Brockermeyer, Carson Bruno, Mike Nichols. I think in the Big 12, that's a starting unit that can work. The issue with the O-line is going to be when you get past those guys, there's not a ton of depth there. So you can't really afford injuries. And it's one of the most physical positions on the field. So you're most likely going to have at least some bumps and bruises and possibly some injuries that are going to keep guys from missing some time here and there. So I think that's really kind of the make or break for how this offense functions. But as far as surprises go, I mean, I think Dalen Wright is really the big one. Everybody else kind of pretty much went chalk based on kind of what we had heard through the offseason. And so that's your offense for Friday night against Stanford. Flipping over to the defensive side, I mentioned Paul Oluwole was not on this list. At one of those edge spots, Nana Afosa-Mensah, he'll be starting in front of or in place of Paul while he's out. Travis Jackson, the freshman, in the 2 deep. So, I mean, that's encouraging that he's there, but also kind of speaks to the lack of depth at that spot. At tackle, Caleb Fox, followed by Zach Chapman. And then at nose guard, Timon Mitchell, and behind him, Marcus Steele, the young player that they're super excited about. At that stud linebacker position, new spot on this defense. Cooper McDonald or Devin Deal, I think those guys are going to be interchangeable, but they were really complimentary about Cooper McDonald from San Diego State, how he came in, really studied the offense, understood what he was supposed to do, and just had a really good presence about him from the moment that he stepped on campus. So he's earned that spot. Devin Deal also going to be someone who they rotate in and out as a pass rusher. And in those nickel and dime packages, there were times, according to Jamie Plunkett from Horned Frog Blitz, that both those guys were on the field simultaneously. So you'll see some different formations and some different looks as they rotate those players around. At linebacker, this is another surprise. At middle linebacker, Johnny Hodges is a starter, and then Caleb Alarms-Orr is in the two deep there behind Johnny. Johnny had a rough year last year. Now, I think some of that was just the scheme and putting him in bad situations, but I really thought Caleb Alarms-Orr, Cal transfer, was going to be the lock-it-in starter, but credit to Johnny. I mean, he won the job at least to start the season. We'll see what happens as the games get going, but quite a win by him to get that done. At that other linebacker spot, Nnamdi Obaizor, followed by Max Carroll, and then Shad Banks is on the third team as of now. Safety spot, Abe Kamara, Jamal Johnson, and Bud Clark. And, I said this in my depth chart projection. I thought Jamal Johnson could beat Cam Smith, and he did. Talented player, true sophomore, getting in there, getting a chance to make plays. That safety group looks really promising. I'm excited to see what they can do from a standpoint of creating turnovers and just creating havoc in the back end of that defense. And then at your corner spot, Travis Broughton and Lamarian James, followed by Javon McIver and Shannon Canada. Again, Avery Helm and Vernon Glover both out indefinitely with injuries. Doesn't sound like either of those guys will be super active, if at all, this season. On special teams, your place kicker is Kyle Limmerman, the freshman from South Lake Carroll. So that's good. He's got a strong leg. I think, he's at a place where he can add to the ceiling of this team just by giving them more points and putting less pressure on the offense to move the ball, even though, you want to score touchdowns. That's the key here. If you're going to win a lot of games, you got to find a way to convert in the red zone and convert in plus territory when you get there. At kick return and punt return. At punt return, J.P. Richardson, who did, that for the majority of last year. And then Jack Besh also listed as a punt returner, which is interesting. At kick return, Major Everhart and Jordan Bailey, the speedsters. And I hope they get some opportunities, but I'll be honest with you. At this point in football, the smartest thing on the kickoff return might just be to fair catch it. So hopefully they break one. But, yeah, it's getting tougher and tougher to really make an impact at that position with all the rule changes. So that's your depth chart. That's what your starters are going to look like when they take the field against Stanford this upcoming weekend. When we come back, I want to talk about some news from The Athletic. They did their yearly ranking of college football coaches. What tier does Sonny Dykes fall into? And I'll tell you why I think this is a huge year for his reputation and the narrative moving forward. That's on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. When I was in college, when I was at TCU, I used to think I was a night owl. Like, if people ask me, are you a morning person or are you someone that gets more done in the evenings? I would say, oh, yeah, I was someone that would like to stay up. That was when I could be super productive. But I've gotten older, and now that I have 4 children, I've realized that I just had no responsibilities earlier in my life. And that was really what was going on. It wasn't so much that I was more productive at night. It was just I was less tired because I didn't have a lot happening outside of school. But nowadays, I'm like, man, how am I going to stay up for this 9:30 kickoff against Stanford on Friday night? And I'll tell you, one of our great sponsors, I'm going to try 5-Hour Energy. If you need to stay up late watching the sports, 5-Hour Energy Shot will give you the energy to stay alert to watch all your favorite games. 0 sugar, a convenient portable size. It's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. 5-Hour Energy has a lot of different flavors: watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. Try them all. You can build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors and it's delivered right to your door. You know that you can find it at the convenience store, but now you can order it online too and personalize those flavors. Do that today. 5 Hour Energy, proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. A lot of different websites do this in the off season, but The Athletic, Bruce Feldman and Chris Vanini, who are writers there, they've started this yearly tradition of they rank all the coaches in FBS football, and they separate them into tiers. So there's 8 different tiers that all these coaches fall into. And I was curious where Sonny Dykes would be because he's coming off such a up and down 2-year stretch. He ended up in tier 3. Here are the coaches that are with him in tier 3. Jeff Brom at Louisville, Mack Brown at North Carolina, Troy Calhoun at Air Force, Matt Campbell at Iowa State, Jeremy Chadwell, who is at Liberty, Dave Clawson at Wake Forest, Mario Cristobal at Miami, Eli Derkowitz at Missouri, Kirk Ferentz at Iowa, Sonny at TCU, PJ Fleck at Minnesota, James Franklin at Penn State, Hugh Freeze at Auburn, Willie Fritz at Houston, Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State, Josh Heupel at Tennessee, Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, Chris Kleiman at Kansas State, Dan Lanning at Oregon, Gus Malzahn at UCF, Rich Rodriguez at Jacksonville State, Bronco Mendenhall at New Mexico, Steve Sarkisian at Texas, Jonathan Smith, at Michigan State, and Mark Stoops at Kentucky. So this is a good list. I mean, these are guys that have done it at a high level. Mack Brown is a former national champion. It was at Texas many years ago, but still, he has that under his belt. And Mack and Sonny are really the only guys that have won at that level in this tier. Now, the other coaches have been incredibly consistent. And what I mean about at this level is Sonny won a playoff game and Mack won a national title. And so that's kind of the separator. Tier 2, the level above where Sonny's ranked right now, is Ryan Day, Kalen DeBoer, Luke Fickell, Brian Kelly, Lance Leipold, Mike Norvell, Lincoln Riley, and Kyle Whittingham. So that's a good list of coaches. And 2 Big 12 coaches there in Lance Leipold and Kyle Whittingham. So it's hard for me to argue. I spent a lot of time a couple off seasons ago really defending Sonny Dykes because I felt like he wasn't getting enough credit. I do feel like this is a huge year for him, though, because you could make the argument, and I don't fall into this camp necessarily completely. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think there's some things that Sonny does really well. I feel like there's obviously areas where he can grow. One thing that really surprised me in year 1, because I didn't associate these attributes with him as a coach before he took over. But that team that, won a playoff game, they had incredible mental toughness. They were physically tough as well. Good attention to detail, leadership, all the kind of intangible things. And that just did a complete 180 last season. And honestly, I feel like last season, even though I think Sonny's a good coach, was closer to the type of identity that his teams have had throughout his career, which is, at SMU, they were good, but they would sort of falter down the stretch. They weren't always known for being physical. Same type of thing at Louisiana Tech. The Cal tenure wasn't good. I wouldn't say it was a complete disaster, but it wasn't good. And eventually he decided to leave / they asked him. They didn't, put their arms over the door to try to keep him in California when he was ready to go. But I feel like this is a big season because I believe just listening to this fan base and knowing how a lot of our listeners and viewers think, the narrative around Sonny kind of falls into 2 camps. It's, hey, this guy's a good coach. He knows how to win. He's a great CEO. He understands how to put coaches and players in positions where they can succeed. And he kind of tries to just let them do their thing and stay out of the way, and that's his biggest strength. I think there's also a camp that's like he took over a roster that was very senior heavy, that had a lot of talent left over from the Gary Patterson era, and that was desperate for a new voice. Because even though Gary was an outstanding coach, I mean, anyone with a brain could tell that things had gotten stale. And for whatever reason, they weren't responding to his messaging. And then Sonny came in, and he's a very different personality and a lot more laid back and kind of allows players to do their things. And I think that resonated with that team. And that team could enjoy that freedom and thrive in it because they were disciplined and they held themselves accountable. Last year's group didn't do that as well. And so this is going to be a huge year to sort of see, okay, at the Power 5 level, what kind of coach is Sonny Dykes and what does he want the identity of his teams to be moving forward? When we come back, we'll get into some audience reaction and wrap things up. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. You ever get to a restaurant, you're meeting a friend there, and you're the first one there, and maybe you're a little earlier, you get that text, it's like, hey, I'm about 10 minutes out. And you're like, man, what am I going to do here for 10 minutes? You kind of scroll Twitter, and you get done with that quickly. Why not find a new game that you can kill some time with? Ultimate College Football Head Coach. If you've ever dreamed of being the head coach of your own program, you can do that with Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Amazing game and simulation to let you step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your program to glory. It's completely free, no ads. It's 100% playable. And, of course, it has a special offer. We're giving you a special offer. That promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Take advantage of this perk and get your team off to a fast start. Download in the App Store or go to ultimate-cfb.com or look it up in the App Store or on Google Play. Ultimate Football Head Coach. Also want to share with you Ibotta. If you're spending a lot of money, which you probably are these days, why not get Ibotta? It's a free app that allows you to earn cash back every time you shop. Hundreds of items, groceries, beauty supplies, even toys. You can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of a shopping trip or more. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying the app. Locked On College when you register. Go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back. And again, use that code Locked On College. That's Ibotta, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store, and use that promo code Locked On College. Staying on that topic of the identity of this team, in yesterday's episode, I was discussing reasons why you should be excited for this TCU football season. One thing I mentioned was this Andy Avalos defense getting back to being physical on that side of the ball. Jim Norris said, I really like how you pointed out Avalos' defensive team this year. One thing about Coach P's defensive units, they didn't take any prisoners. It wasn't unusual to see quarterbacks knocked out of the game 2 or 3 times a year on clean hits. So I'm hoping to see a return that style go frogs. Yeah, they got to get more physical. It's tackle football. You got to get guys to the ground. And they were bad at that last year. Like just fundamental things along with, I think, the scheme being an issue and some other things on defense. The main factor that kept coming up was they just weren't playing good fundamental football, and they have to get back to that this upcoming season. David May with several takes. He said wide receiver talent's going to have to do something, this upcoming year to really take the team to the next level. Defense took the air out of the offense last year when a third down stop was needed. It did not happen. He thinks punt return settled in when the switch to J.P. Richardson was made. Loved how Sonny told Josh to pick his spots as a gunslinger. Spread the ball to Dabney, Besh, and Curtis to pick up the production lost in Wiley. Yeah, they are losing. I mean, I think Jared Wiley is going to be a big loss. Now, as you said, they got a couple different guys that they can get the ball to try to replace his production. But he was a really good option for them last season over the middle of the field. I'm excited about this wide receiver group. O-line wise, they have to come together quickly, and it's going to be a challenge. But I do think there's more talent this year across the board, and that should be helpful for the O-line. And Josh Hoover has to find a way to not turn the ball over. Protecting the football is going to be a huge key for this offense this year. So a lot of questions that we're going to see answered, though, over the next couple of days when they take the field against Stanford. We'll be back in tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.